All right, let's talk about one of the strangest, darkest, and maybe one of the most profound ideas I have ever stumbled across. It's this wild theory that connects everything from 19th-century philosophy to video game lore and even the fundamental laws of physics. This is the story of God's last wish.
So let me just start by throwing a pretty crazy question at you. What if the creation of our entire universe, all the stars, the galaxies, life itself, what if it wasn't an act of creation at all? What if it was actually an act of self-destruction by some all-powerful being?
You're probably wondering, what on earth do these things have in common? Well, stick with me. We're going to connect some very, very different dots. We'll dive into a German philosopher's super grim theory, see how it weirdly pops up in video games like the Elder Scrolls, touch on a wild internet theory that came out of 4chan, and then see how it all lines up, scarily well, with the scientific fate of our universe.
Okay, so first things first, how do we even get to this idea of a universe born from the death of a god? Well, the core concept is actually kinda simple, but it will absolutely bend your mind. This is the absolute heart of it. The idea that our entire reality is the direct result of a perfect, all-powerful God deciding it just didn't want to be anymore. And look, this isn't some new sci-fi idea. This concept has some surprisingly deep and, very dark philosophical roots.
To really get where this whole thing comes from, we need to go back in time and meet the man who basically took German pessimism to its most extreme and, frankly, shocking conclusion.
His name was Philipp Mainländer. He was a philosopher, a poet, and his entire life's work built up to this one single massive idea. And in a move that is just eerily fitting for his philosophy, he took his own life the very day after his masterpiece, The Philosophy of Redemption, was published. It's said he even used a stack of his own books as the platform.
So for Mainländer, everything starts before the Big Bang, with what he called the simple unity. Picture this, a single, perfect, all-powerful God. It's everything. But in this state of absolute perfection, this being comes to a truly startling conclusion, that non-existence is actually way better than an eternity of just being.
So Mainländer had to solve this huge metaphysical puzzle, right? How does a timeless, infinite being actually end itself? It can't just poof, disappear. So, according to him, the only way was for it to shatter its single, timeless self into a broken, time-bound material universe. Our existence, everything we see, is a tiny fragment of that original being. And inside every single fragment is this faint echo of that original wish for non-existence, what he called the will to die.
And this quote just, wow. It perfectly captures his worldview. He didn't see the universe as this beautiful, divine creation. No. To him, it was literally the decaying remains of a dead god, slowly breaking down and heading toward that final state of absolute nothingness that it wanted from the very beginning.
To really get Mainländer, it helps to see where he fits in. He was basically in conversation with these other giants of German thought. You have Arthur Schopenhauer, who said the universe is driven by this blind, endless suffering will to life. Mainländer took that and gave it a finish line, a will to death. And then, of course, there's Nietzsche, who famously declared, God is dead. Well, Mainländer had already come up with a literal, metaphysical story for how it happened, arguing God died by his own hand before time even began.
But this wild idea from the 1800s didn't just collect dust on a library shelf. Oh no, it has found a whole new life in some of our favorite modern fiction, especially in the worlds of fantasy and video games.
You can see this theme pop up all over the place. In The Witcher, it's super personal, a magic wish that ties two people's fates together forever. But it can also be world-changing, like in the web series A Practical Guide to Evil, where it becomes a reality-bending curse. But probably the closest parallel to Mainlander's whole cosmic suicide thing comes from the lore of the Elder Scrolls. The god Lorkhan literally sacrifices his divine self to create the mortal world, Mundus, which is a direct echo of a god dying to create the universe.
Okay, so we've covered philosophy, we've covered fiction, and this is where the rabbit hole gets really deep. We're about to go from the dusty pages of an old book to the chaotic forums of the internet, and then all the way to the actual laws that govern reality itself.
Okay, you're not going to believe this one. There's this theory that made the rounds on 4chan that tries to explain the huge personality shift in the Abrahamic God between the Old and New Testaments. It basically says the vengeful God of the Old Testament had a total psychological breakdown, an ego death, after seeing how messed up his own creation was. The theory goes that God was so horrified by his own work that his personality just shattered and reformed into the loving God of the New Testament.
Now hang on, because this is where a fringe internet theory and actual physics start to, well, rhyme. Let's talk about the second law of thermodynamics. All it really says is that in any closed system, like our universe, things always move from a state of order toward a state of disorder, or entropy. It's a fundamental rule of reality.
And if you put on your Mainlander glasses for a second, this lines up perfectly. From his perspective, entropy isn't just some random physical law. It's the engine of God's suicide, the slow decay of the universe, stars burning out, everything cooling down and spreading out. That's not some cosmic tragedy. It's the plan working. The heat death of the universe isn't failure. It's the ultimate success of God's last wish.
So far, this has been, well, pretty bleak, right? A suicidal God, a rotting universe, and an inevitable end in total nothingness. But here's the final incredible twist to Mainlander's philosophy. One that turns this entire dark worldview into something else entirely. A radical call for compassion.
You'd think a philosophy this bark would lead to despair, but Mainlander was actually a socialist, and he took a hard left turn. He argued that the fastest, most ethical way to fulfill God's wish wasn't through violence, but through kindness. His logic was that suffering makes us cling desperately to life. It strengthens that will to live. So if you want to quiet that will and help the universe die peacefully, you have to get rid of suffering. You have to abolish injustice and promote universal compassion. His final step? Voluntary celibacy, to just stop creating new suffering beings.
And that's really the question he leaves us with, isn't it? If we just for a moment accept this strange, dark idea that our whole existence is just a temporary bridge from nothing to nothing, it changes everything. The destination might be oblivion, but according to this incredibly grim philosopher, the journey itself should be defined by how we treat each other, how we walk across that bridge. Well, that might just be the only thing that ever really mattered.